Hello and welcome to Hashtag Event Icons, where you get to chat with the icons of the events industry. My name is Alex Plaxen, and today I am co-hosting with Brandt Krueger. Say hi, Brandt.
Hi, Brandt.
And today we are going to be talking about diversity and inclusion, which is a topic we've talked about quite a few times before, but I feel like every time we have this conversation, we always end the hour and we go, there's so much more to be said. So we're really excited to have two new guests with us who I will introduce in just a second. Really excited to have them. But for now, let's get to it.
It's Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern, so you know what that means. It's time for another episode of Hashtag Event Icons.
Presented by Endless Events.
The show where you get to ask the icons of the events industry anything.
Just go to www.event-icons.com to ask questions.
Our iconic guests will answer them live during the entire show. Before we get started, the more people we have watching, the better the conversation. So please help share Hashtag Event Icons
on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Just tell your friends to watch at www.event-icons.com.
Now, without any further delay, this is Hashtag Event Icons.
All right. So our first guest joining us is Risha Brandt. And she's been in the industry for a long time. She's known for her BS video series. And she is a contributor to Black Enterprise magazine. She's phenomenal. We're very excited to have her. She has an entire giant list of awards and acknowledgments. Go Google her if you want to hear all of them. But thank you so much for joining us today, Risha.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And then we also have Hilary, who's a very good friend of mine. We are going to be serving together on the Media Professionals International Potomac Chapter Board this coming year, so I'm very excited for that. And she and I have known each other pretty much since I entered the industry.
Wow.
She started as a male theatrical designer and transitioned to being East Coast female live event designer with lots of twists and turns along the way. So we'll get to hear some of the story. And it's very exciting to have you here, Hilary. Thanks so much for joining us.
It's really a pleasure. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, as I mentioned to our guests earlier, we always like to start off any new guest with our two questions, which are, how did you get into the events industry? And if you weren't in the events industry, what would you be doing? So let's start off with Risha.
I got into the events industry as a speaker. That's been, since 2014, I started speaking publicly and now attending events all over the world. If I were not in the events industry, I'd still be running my business, which now it's a part of my business, but I think that would still be my total focus.
And for those who don't know, tell everyone what your business is, what it is you do.
Risha Grant LLC is a diversity communications consulting and training firm located in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So I've been at it almost 25 years. It'll be 25 years this year. And so if you think about it from the perspective of a diversity and inclusion company in Oklahoma, many people laugh at that because we're not exactly known for diversity. We were talking about Obama just a minute ago. All 77 counties voted against Obama when he ran for president and for Trump when he ran for president. So it's really a juxtaposition to do what I do in this state.
Awesome.
Wow.
Well, it's something that we'll talk about a little bit later as well, is kind of locations and how diversity and inclusion plays into that. So I'm really interested to hear that perspective. Hilary, tell us a bit about yourself, what you do, how you got into the industry, and if you weren't in the industry, what you would be doing.
Well, if theater is included in the event industry, then I got started by being late to an audition and being told I had to work backstage because they'd cast all the roles. And once I started doing that, I just found a calling to it. So I've been doing that since high school, frankly. Went to college, did theater, got out of there, did theater on the West Coast, and then my daughter was born. There was just too much traveling involved in theater, so I started to do retail. And at the time, we were discovering that retail, creating the environments in that, well, it's another kind of set design, really. So I did that for a number of years. And then in the late 90s, we discovered the idea of the experience economy and how business was theater. And at that point, I moved into working on trade show displays, I got some awards, and I met some folks from GES Exposition Services at the time, and now it's GES is now global experiential. So I helped them with that transition, actually. So in the early 2000s, I was doing that, and more recently, I guess, after the last recession, I got involved in doing galas, and that was a real return to the kind of stage designs I was doing before. So, and that's the primary focus of my business now, is doing large galas here in the Washington area.
In my book, if you come from the theater world, I think that totally counts, because all the cool kids come from theater in the events industry. I'm not biased in any way, shape, or form about that, but I think it totally counts.
Well, that's something you and I have in common too. Is my background's in film set design, and so absolutely that whole experiential element, especially when you're talking about the experience economy, absolutely. Relates to the events industry and design, right? Which is something that's so important right now. So if you weren't doing what you're doing now, what would you be doing?
I would be a charter boat captain. Yeah. So sailing is my other love. And so if I wasn't designing, I think I would be doing that. It'd be out on the ocean sailing.
We got a pirate finally.
Nice. That's a new one.
You're our first pirate.
Fantastic.
Well, I wouldn't, but at this point, I don't have to steal the boat, because that's how you get started as a pirate. And I already own a boat, so, but I would need a bigger one to be a good captain there.
We're gonna need a bigger boat.
Need a bigger boat.
No, it's funny. It's so interesting when we hear what everyone would be doing, especially when so many people fell into the industry. So it's interesting to hear what their other passions are and what they'd be doing. But I'm pretty sure you're our first captain of a. So, yeah, that's awesome.
All right, folks, enough with the softballs. I think we're ready to get into this one. So here's, this is something that's come up on a few of the episodes that we've as we've looked into diversity and inclusion. Those words get bound together an awful lot. Very frequently bound together as one solid phrase, but something that we've talked about in the past, and I would love to get both of your takes on this, is kind of the differences between diversity and inclusion. What are the differences? What are the similarities? And should these words even be kind of bound together as much as they are? Hilary, we just finished with you, so why don't we kick it off with your take on that?
Well, I think that we use them together, but in many ways they're sort of one step and then the next. If you can promote diversity, so you can seek it out, you can hire a diverse workforce. Inclusion is how you practice it. So it's how it works within your company, how you focus on including everybody, making everyone comfortable, making the workplace work for everyone.
Great.
They are definitely lumped together, but they are two separate things. Diversity is, to me, it's that unique spark that we all have that makes us different. It's what gives you your competitive advantage. I mean, yes, it's the categorical things of your race, your age, your sexuality, your religion, and all those things. But it's also those food preferences that you have, the way you rock your hairstyle. You know, it's truly you, about you. I think inclusion creates value around the diversity that we have. So I like to think of it as diversity is all about you, inclusion is about us. And inclusion is honestly where I think we all suck at.
Fair enough.
We don't do a good job of making sure that all the voices are heard. We just don't. And we really need to do a much better job of that so that people actually feel like they belong.
So, one of these things with diversity and inclusion also is this idea, and I'm glad you mentioned like your food preferences, like that's diversity, right? Because when you're talking about events and inclusion, you're talking about more than just what you look like or are you part of the LGBT community, things like that. Are you your gender, things like that. I got diagnosed as being gluten-free this past year. And so all of a sudden,
Alex. I
know it's terrible.
Gluten is where the flavor is.
but it's true, and I found myself at events feeling not included. Right, like for me, I had to go out of my way to some like back alley, like to someone for a special meal, and even the info desk didn't know where that food like was to get it. Right, so it's nuts how inclusion is so much about how do we make someone feel welcome, right?
Right.
Whereas diversity is what makes us different.
Exactly.
And in a way, I feel like diversity, and correct me if I'm wrong, maybe you feel differently, but I feel like our differences is what unites us as people anyway. Right, like we talk about diversity. It should, yeah. It should. But what makes us all the same is that we are all different, right? Mm-hmm. And we do all have these unique little things about us. But I think that from an events perspective, there's absolutely a way that we can try to be as inclusive as possible of everyone based on their differences. And I think that's where the industry struggles.
Right. I see a lot of diversity conferences. Not too long ago, a client actually posted a photo from a huge conference, and I won't name them, but they had a diversity panel and it was all white men. I thought, how does that happen for a diversity panel? I can't imagine how, I can't understand how that happens. And that's why I'm always, I feel a lot of times that we just don't care. We know better and we just don't care to do better.
Yeah. Hilary, what is your feeling on that?
Well, I think, one of the biggest challenges for people is that underneath whatever kind of cover that we might have, we think that everyone thinks like us. Mm-hmm. And so, we look for, sort of naturally look for people who do think like us. And so we have this challenge in creating inclusion in finding people who don't look like us. And it has to be an active process. For me, it's always in my creative process, it's always a matter of, if I can include more people in that process, it gets more creative. I mean, I've got lots of great ideas on my own, but if I connect with a client who sees things a little differently, then how our ideas mash together gets more exciting. It gets more interesting. And I think that that's true in every setting, whatever we're creating. That kind of diversity and including all the thoughts involved is really important. So we have to reach out, especially the people who aren't, sort of naturally speaking up.
Right. Right. There's always a reason people aren't naturally speaking up, in my opinion. Something has happened. There's a reason that they don't feel they have a voice. So I think in those instances, we should be allies, because it doesn't take a lot to just say, hey, you haven't said much today. What do you think about this?
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, marginalized communities, diverse groups, they need that sometimes.
Yeah. Because
historically they are left out of the conversation.
So but first they have to be on the panel.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
But I think that's an interesting point that you've made, is that it sounds like it starts from behind the scenes, and not necessarily what the attendees are going to see, right? Like the best way to be inclusive and to think about those things is by having people who are diverse be the ones making those decisions.
Right. Right. But I don't think there's enough diversity a lot of times behind the scenes so that it actually shows up at the event. There aren't enough people back there that are helping to make those decisions. And I think, diversity and inclusion, they can't just be buzzwords, because our climate is so polarized right now. It has to become an organic way that we think and live. And that's the part that we're not doing. I think that we check a box and say, let's have a diversity panel, because diversity is in.
Mm-hmm.
But then you show up with a panel of all white guys. I mean, you really miss the mark. Yeah. So I think those voices are extremely important to decision making.
Why is it important? Why is diversity and inclusion? I mean, I'm sure everyone has a reason, but for those who are struggling to find a reason to invest in making these important decisions and maybe even hiring diverse hires and things like that, why is this important?
I think it's simple. I mean, my heart wants to say because it's the right thing to do, but for a business, I'm going to say because your company needs to reflect the world that it operates in.
Right.
And as we become more diverse, you look at disposable spending in diverse communities. We're talking $14 trillion. And most of your companies realize that there is disposable money in these communities, but 60% of marketing managers still don't earmark dollars for those diverse groups.
Yep.
So it's hard for me to understand. And that's why I focus on unconscious bias, because nothing else makes sense.
Right.
The money is there, but you won't put any of the money into those communities. So that, and when I say disposable income, I'm talking money after you pay your bills.
Right.
So to spend on your products and services. So that's why I think it's important. Otherwise, you risk alienating huge groups of people with a lot of money to spend. And I believe that companies that do that are not going to have the longevity and sustainability that they need to continue forward.
Well, and I think that's interesting when you're talking dollars and cents in marketing too. Hilary and I attended an event this past year. I won't say who it was or anything, but it was an LGBT event, travel event, and we probably saw 6 or 7 different destinations get up there and tout their marketing efforts to market to the LGBT community. And I sat there for 3 days watching beautiful, very fit gay men of all colors, and they're like, "Ooh, look, we have the black gay men and the Hispanic gay men," and I was like, "Cool. So where do black or where do overweight gay men go to vacation?" Because I saw no one who looked like me in any of those ads. I'm like, that's nice. I don't have rock hard abs. Where do I go to vacation? Or where do I hold my meeting? And it's true, right? Like even when we think we're being diverse and being inclusive, we're still missing the mark sometimes.
Right, leaving somebody out.
Yeah. And like,
well, and we
put someone who looks like me in their ad. You got my business.
We definitely didn't. We saw a few lesbian couples, but we saw 0 trans people.
Right.
I mean, there were absolutely, and none of them.
And I think I saw at an event in January, I finally saw a destination. They had a gay couple, and one of the men was of a larger stature, and I was like, "Oh my God, there
There he is!"
Yes. But it's true, right? I think and that gets to one of those things when you see in the diversity and inclusion marketing and stuff, where like they'll change their color to the rainbow, or they'll use a hashtag like Black Girl Magic during Black History Month, but they won't actually be doing anything effective to help those communities or to be diverse.
Exactly. You see that a lot. And I think I don't want to, any effort is worth it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, at least you have some type of mind awareness to even think about it, but it's so much deeper than that. And when you start, you know, only celebrating, that's what a lot of these companies have employee resource groups or business resource groups where you have the African-American group, the Hispanic, LGBT group. I mean, every group you can think of. But if they never come together, that's not actually inclusion, it's exclusion. Mm-hmm. And if they can come together and actually put together a plan that now the company has something to work for and really understands the needs of their diverse groups, then you're starting to create difference there. But I think that's why my whole theme of BS is so important to me, because we just, you know, and BS actually stands for bias synapse, but the fact that we don't recognize how much we exclude people, and that's I kind of tend to think that we do recognize it.
You raise a really interesting point that I'm curious about, because I'm curious mainly to kind of know if it's a trend or if it's just something that I'm noticing or what. But I've noticed more often of the kind of LGBT gatherings making a point of saying, oh, by the way, if you're not, please come, because we want to make it an open thing, not just an us community thing, right, but also supporters and friends and family and things like that who might not necessarily be in the community, but, you know, want to support the community. And I feel like I've seen more of that on conference promotions and things like that. Like, hey, this section is being promoted by you know, this wing of the organization, but we would like to let you all know that you are more than welcome to come and join us as well.
Yeah, I mean, you see that with events like the LGBT Meeting Professionals Association, where they'll have a reception. And I know in the past, you know, when I first joined the industry, I remember those meetings were mostly gay men. And now it's like you see someone very attractive and you go, I don't know if they're gay. This is a shame. But at the same time, you're like, oh, thank God there's so many allies here, right? That's great, right? It is nice to have those allies there and things like that. And I think that is important. I remember when I was at a conference when the Pulse shooting happened, the Pulse nightclub shooting. Right. And the very next day is when the LGBT reception was, and it was packed to the brim. Everyone came, and we read out loud the names of all the victims from the shooting, and it was extremely powerful to have that support from the overarching community. Right. So I think we're moving in the right direction. But obviously there's some barriers here. What would you say, Hilary and Risha, are some of the barriers to inclusion?
Well, I think that, you know, part of it, you know, is our thinking. And part of it is that because we're looking for people who think like us, we often look for people who look like us. And I think that, you know, the largest barrier is to step beyond, you know, just your friends and just the people you happen naturally get connected with. I think you have to make that step. And I guess that's the diversity part in particular, is actually seeking out people who think differently than you, who look differently than you, to to really expand your horizons. It really is enriching. That's what we have to understand. It's not just because it's nice to do. It's because it's important that you get that diversity of opinion. You can't reach a wide market from just a single perspective.
Very true. I agree with everything Hilary just said. I also think the biggest barrier we face is fear. You know, and that's maybe a little different way of what Hilary just expressed, but fear is that whole belief system of fear is so strong in how we live our lives that even when we don't recognize it, it's there. And I always ask my audiences to imagine that they're on an airplane and they've announced that the flight is completely full, but that middle seat next to you is open. Who don't you want to sit there, right? We go through, you know, people with piercings and dyed hair and facial tattoos and turbans and hijab, and, you know, and we raise in my audiences, I've spoken to over 20,000 people the last few years, and there's always a group, no matter who you say, that people don't feel comfortable sitting next to. So what I've learned over these years is we don't like anybody. We're scared. And I always tell my audiences, like, if someone sits next to me with a facial tattoo, it is the best conversation ever. There's always a great story behind a facial tattoo.
Oh yeah.
You know, and so I think the fear of the unknown, or we grew up living through the past pains and experiences of the people who raised us. And so we hear things that are introduced to us really young, and it becomes a bias and it becomes a fear, not even a fear that we've experienced ourselves in a lot of those instances, but through the experiences of our parents or grandparents or whomever was in our lives. And so when we're in proximity to the people that we fear, we just shrink. You know, we don't want to invite them in. And most of the time, you can use that time on an airplane next to a person that makes you uncomfortable to get over that. So it's not a barrier. A really quick conversation helps to move past that barrier, and you start thinking, you know, at the end of the flight, you're like, wow, this person is a lot like me. Same fears, worries, you know, concerns about family, all of these things that I have. But that fear is it's paralyzing for so many people. And I think we have to, it's okay to have fear, but do it anyway.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think the saying where God loves diversity, that, you know, God's made so many different types of people and so on, but people fear diversity. And fear is what is the opposite of love in my book. It's not hate, it's fear. That's what makes us close those doors and shut down and be afraid to get out and do the loving thing. Exactly.
And I think it's lost too. So especially in a work environment, if I embrace you as a diverse person, there's this whole mentality of scarcity. Like, there's not enough for everything that everybody, or for everybody to have what they need. So I'm going to get rid of this person or get rid of this person. And so it's all this fear of loss. Like, even you mentioned hiring earlier. I can't tell you how many companies, how many in-depth interviews that I've had with clients where they admit that if we accept diversity, what happens to all the white men? Where will they work? How will they feed their families? And people shouldn't be hired or fired, but Brandt's laughing at that.
I am, only because I got to, as the 46-year-old white dude in the corner. I'm
46 too. There's nothing wrong with it.
I think they'll be okay.
You think they'll be okay?
For the most part, yeah. You know,
they don't know that they'll be okay though. It is
I know.
Fear
You're dead
that
on.
they have. You know, and my question is always, first my comment, we don't care about these issues until they affect us. We have to start caring a lot sooner, because what affects the least of us will always affect the most of us. So then my question is, now for all these years, the jobs have been going to white men. And all of the people that have been left out of that, now, did you care then?
Right.
And so we have to find a way with these topics to see people in each other's shoes and what that feels like. And those shoes are hard to wear.
Yeah.
So I'm not I'm not the type of person to just like, we need to be able to work, and we need to be able to eat, and we need to be able to do all these things. But I think everybody should be able to join into that. It shouldn't just be these norms, these exclusionary norms that keep people out.
It's so fascinating that you guys went down just those two last roads that you went down, because I was literally having a conversation with my girls about war. And we were kind of bouncing things around. I was like, well, what do you think about this? And what do you think? And where it kind of landed is that wars happen for two reasons. You have something I want, or you're different than me, is what it kind of all boiled down to. And so that's kind of what you guys both just went down, those two different roads, is the fear of the unknown, the fear of the different, or I got to get mine. What if I don't get mine? Because if I embrace diversity and inclusion, then there's going to be one less job for the 46-year-old white guy. And, it's amazing to me how often it feels like we're coming back to these kind of two core fears in humanity.
So I do want to switch gears a little bit and talk more about events and diversity. We talked a bit about, with the panels and having diverse speakers on stage. But other than who we see on stage, what are some other examples of how planners can ensure diversity at their events?
I think by making sure that the event is marketed in a way that it includes diverse groups of people. And that marketing may look a little different than it does for the mainstream market. But taking the time to figure out how to reach those audiences, I think that you begin to see diversity at events. So, I mean, there are all kinds of, if it's African-American market, there's radio stations, there are television stations, I always tell people you have to think a little unconventional. A barbershop, a Black man's barbershop on a Saturday, they're solving all the world problems. You can find them there. So you have to be a little unconventional in how you think about getting different people to your events. But if you put the time in, just like you would with the mainstream market, just kind of doing your research to figure out where you need to go and get the attention of different people, then you'll find that. And there are a lot of people out there willing to help with that as well.
So I have a question for you as a Black woman who attends events, because I've heard this from another Black woman, is that, and I'm sure some of us have seen it in marketing for events that we attend, is the professional event photographer will go around and basically stalk the diverse attendee.
Right, the one person, yeah.
Right, and take as many photos of them as possible so it can be used in the marketing for the following year. And then you basically get to see your face for the entire year because you were the one Black woman at the event.
Exactly.
So is that the right way to go about doing this? Is there a different way that they can handle that? Is there a better way to handle that? Because the one thing that this woman said was she is frustrated by it, but at the same time she appreciates it because she knows that if she's not using that marketing, then they won't be able to attract more people that look like her.
Exactly. I think it's a double-edged sword because you have to, you want to get more people there. And honestly, people are they're now looking at websites and brochures and all those things to see, is there anyone that looks like me here? And as many events as I'm at a year, I can tell you it may be me and two other people that look like me at these events. So when it comes to the photographer, I think it is frustrating, but I have to agree with person you're talking to. It's also necessary. But I think they should probably also just kind of ask about it too, because after a while, you're just kind of like.
Is there a way to reach out to those attendees who are the diverse attendees and ask them to almost be like influencer marketing, like have them actually be part of the process rather than, hey, you already approved that we could take your photo?
I think that would be appreciated. Because now they're giving you their permission to help diversify your audience rather than you just, because also people know, if if everything I see has this one black woman, and I come next year and there's the same black woman and 5,000 white people, then I know that you just tricked me, and that won't go over well at all. I think especially people of color get so tired of that because it happens so much and it's not genuine.
Right.
So I think as long as it's a genuine, where, to your point, would you be an influencer? Would you be a part of this? That goes a long way in dealing with the frustration of having, people chasing you around.
Right.
So,
it feels like it'd also be a way to overcome a lack of diversity on your team. So if you haven't been able to, hire and bring in diversity into your team, that would be a way that you could start to, because I wouldn't know necessarily where the best place to market to a black woman would be, So by reaching out and engaging those attendees, that does seem like a fantastic way to start, diversifying your mindset, as it were, if you're not able or haven't been able to do your team.
I don't have to worry about that, as I'm very conventional. I even have a convention woman haircut. Apparently, I've been spotted in airports by people, and they said, "Yeah, you must be coming from a convention." It wasn't my badge at all, but so unless I strap on my tool belt, I don't look unconventional. So. I almost got a spit take out of Brandt with that one, I think. So
yeah, I mean, you got the little bit of the librarian thing going on. So then my mind went to then taking that look and putting on the tool belt.
The tool belt.
Quality.
But I do think that's an important thing to consider when you are trying to diversify your event. It's a process, right? It's a multi-year process. It's not going to happen overnight. And there are ways to go about reaching those audiences in an inoffensive way, right? Where you are.
I'm sorry. It goes back to having the people sitting around the table be diverse. Because one of the things, I think people make the mistake of is you may have a black woman on the team, but she may not be connected to the black community. Being black does not connect you to that community. Being gay doesn't connect you to that community. Connection is intentional. So if you ask them up front, because you may get disappointed when you assume that, right? So if you ask them up front, you tell them what you expect and what you need, they can tell you whether or not they're the person for that.
Right.
But the inclusive part of it is having those people that are making the decisions. And I think being upfront about what you need from diverse people, because they could be there for a totally different reason. And so a lot of times it's just assumed that, oh, you'll go into the black community, you'll go into the gay community, you'll go into the Latinx community, and we'll be able to get those people. And it's like, no,
Right.
not really. I had a guy tell me, he said, every time I go out with my coworkers, they do the whole black handshake thing with me. They shake each other's hand regular. When they get to me, they just, he's like, I don't know the black handshake. I wasn't raised around a lot of black people. So, you have to do a little bit of homework. Make sure that what you want is what you can get out of that person or what you need.
Right. So, Hilary, we didn't really get to give you a chance to answer. What are some other examples of how planners can ensure diversity at their events?
Well, I think it's a matter of considering the diversity of people, how people think. And so, you have to consider neurological diversity and how you go about setting up the communication. So is it communicating well to people who are, both visual and, or verbal, or they need to have touch involved. So that's, you've got to kind of catch people at whatever they're bringing to the table. So I think that you can also, we mentioned it before in terms of satisfying their basic needs too. Is the food going to be, is there a gluten-free option for Alex? And is there, access for all the people who have handicaps, a lot of times that gets overlooked. Someone wants to have something kind of look a certain way, and they'll overlook the fact that, oh, well, somebody can't get up on that platform.
You mean having a beach reception is not great for people in wheelchairs?
Yeah, it has its limits, and unless you're going to provide a beach wheelchair, for those that need to or want to participate, you're just closing the door, and all too often people overlook that kind of thing. So, my partner is let's see, she's differently abled, shall we say. She's a polio survivor, and so she's in a wheelchair much of the time. So I'm particularly sensitive to that, and so I'll often bring it up when we're in meetings and so on. But I think that you've always got to advocate for all the different diversity that is out there. And if somebody isn't in the room, if you can't get them into the room, let's at least say, well, my friends who are like this, want to consider this aspect to it. So I think that that's incumbent on us as planners to make holistic events.
And I'm glad you mentioned things about like people who are more visual versus auditory, things like that. I think another area we don't really consider is introverts versus extroverts, right? Like,
very true.
Having a reception with really loud music and bright lights in your face, and like that's not for everybody. And so you're missing out on networking opportunities, which for a lot of people is one of the reasons they meet face to face, is for the networking opportunities. You're basically saying your type of networking isn't welcome here, right? So, and I think that there's a lot of that goes into diversity and inclusion. I think it's overwhelming, right? Like there's so much to consider.
Right.
Well, I was just curious on that overwhelming point. I mean, do you think that's why folks have a tendency to just do the easy, do the hashtag, do the things like that, because otherwise it's too much effort? You know what I mean? Because I think one of the through threads that I'm hearing from you guys is that it's a very intentional process. It's a continuing process. So boy, that sounds like a lot of work. But we can just throw a rainbow on the Instagram. Okay, cool. Dunsville.
Well, people have always had diverse needs in terms of diet restrictions. Those have always existed. But 5 years ago, you didn't hear about them at all. Now it's an integral part of what we do. It's a rare, I think, environment in which you don't have a chef asking those questions, or putting it on the registration form or something like that. And so we made that change. We can take on this other stuff too.
I think to your point, Brandt, most people feel like, why is everything a thing? It's when it comes to diversity. I mean, you brought up introvert versus extrovert, differently abled people, and then you have gender expression, which is a whole different topic that people can't even hardly begin to grasp, with pronouns and non-binary and cisgender and all of these things. And so it feels like, I think people are constantly being bombarded with, oh, now I have to do this, and now I have to think about this, and I think people get tired of it. And being in the industry as long as I have to admit, there are times where I'm just like, geez, I'm not gonna, because I have a hard time keeping up with gender expression, in all honesty.
Well, but we're in an industry where, what's new? What's next? Well, I mean, they're looking to us, I mean, so I think that we're driven by what's new, what's next. And so I think that's critically important. But I think you're right in that people, not necessarily event planners, in general, have an issue with the rate of change. I mean, the 21st century is coming on hard. There, we got the "okay, boomer," expression because
Yeah.
there's a segment of our population that says, "Oh, hold up there, we don't need some hashtags and stuff. What's all that?"
Right.
In
Right.
addition
But,
to the,
and to your point, we can't finish it. We can't quit the fight. I just know that it is, a lot of people find it taxing.
Well, and the gender expression thing came up, and that's something we hadn't really talked about. In ways to make your events more diverse and welcoming, is I've seen a lot of options now, whether it's a ribbon on your badge or part of the registration process where you can say whether you want it to be printed on your badge.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen really cool sticker sheets that were handed out at an event with things like an avocado, and then they also had the pronouns and a little rainbow and things like that. So you could make it your own, your badge your own,
Right.
and you could choose to use the gender pronoun stickers, or you could just throw an avocado on or a hashtag sticker, right? So there were ways to express other things about yourself with these stickers while also incorporating the gender pronouns. So that it doesn't seem like it's being forced on you, right?
Right.
So I've seen a lot of that with the badges happening recently, and creative ways to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you talk about diversity, it is some of those things that you have to be a bit creative to incorporate it and make people feel welcome without making it stand out.
Right. That's true, because then they feel like, everybody's looking at them because they're different.
Right.
So I've seen some of that too, and it's pretty creative.
Well, and I'd have to express. Can I just express a little concern about the idea of getting, the gender of your avocado? Because, if we make it so that it's not optional, or if we make it so that your pronouns are optional, then all of a sudden we're creating a divide between those people who think that they need to let people know what their pronouns are and those people who don't. Right. And so, I am, except when I have my tool belt on, I'm feminine enough that, it's never a question for people what pronoun to use. But for those that are somewhere in the middle or, recently transitioned or something, that can be an issue. And then, making themselves stand out by putting a pronoun on as the only one in the room with their pronouns on, further stigmatizes them. Mm-hmm. So my own personal feeling is either you make it, a statement for your organization that we use pronouns here, or you don't. Because I think that making it optional can stigmatize people.
You've kind of set me up for the question that I really wanted to ask, because I want to ask you guys. I stumped an inclusion and diversity expert recently with this question, and I want to throw it open to the audience as well to try and get their opinions as well. So I do a lot of voice of God work. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage, right? That kind of thing. And I've been, a lot of this is where stuff we're just trying to figure out is, okay, great. We want to make people feel inclusive. We want to make people feel good and comfortable in their own, gender identity. That phrase has a purpose of it's a way of getting people's attention. So I've been given voice of God's where it's been cut, and it's just like, the program will begin in 5 minutes, and nobody hears it because you don't have that thing in front of it. So I've been kind of throwing out to whoever I can ask, what's a good replacement for that, that's got the formality, right? Because we want people have been like, well, hey folks, not quite, right? So as we're trying to, figure things out, and as we evolve in a society, that's my challenge to you guys and to listeners, to come back and say, okay, what is that thing that we can say that is an attention getter, that is going to be inclusive and not single anybody out, so that we're not going, ladies, gentlemen, non-binary, fluid, we're not trying to get the whole list down. And so anyway, like I say, that's the question that I'm throwing out to folks. By the way, it's also, I hate to, we talk about fear and things like that. Weirdly, I brought this up, around drinks one night, and it's one of the most angry I've ever seen someone get. Was like, well, I would just say no. Like, okay, that's not the question I'm asking. The question is, if you had to do the voice of God, what do you do to fill this space? The client is asking you. I would say no. Okay, you'd walk off the gig rather than say something other than ladies and gentlemen. But there's that irrational fear of change and things like that. I was really shocked by the level of anger that came out around that question. Okay, sorry, I've babbled on long enough. What do you guys think? Any hot takes on what you think that might be?
What about honored guest?
I like it.
But it does cause a lot of, I don't want to know if anger is the right word, but, and maybe some people do get angry, but it causes a lot of confusion. Because I also think neurologically, whether you have on she, her, or hers, or they and them, which I really have a tough time with they and them, getting that right, because I think neurologically we look at people, we put them in a category. You're either male or female. And so when you identify as different than how you look, I think that it's hard for people to remember those pronouns. And so I think grace is going to have to go a long way as we constantly see the changes, and they're constantly happening. So I've had so many people tell me about their children transitioning, but then not giving them the space to also deal with what's going on. Mm-hmm. And so I think there's going to have to be a lot of grace as we all grow and become more and more accepting. And there are so many instances, like you mentioned, Brandt, where my friend whose daughter is transitioning said, my bio even had to change, where I had two boys, 2 girls. Now I have 4 children. So it's, it really is, it's probably one of the most significant changes in the world of diversity in my lifetime. I was transgender, but now the gender expression, because it really is confusing to a lot of people.
Yeah. I think that, maybe you want to have a little fun with it, because, there's Ringling Brothers, ladies and gentlemen, and children of all ages. So you could go ladies and gentlemen, and people of all genders could be a way to go. And that could have a lot of fun with it that way. Or, certainly the treasured guests or so on, that's a way to avoid gendering it. But it is something that you want to kind of catch people's attention with. And I think that there are ways to do it without necessarily gendering. Very often and I think this is something about the people who, choose to be non-binary or be referred to as non-binary, is they're having a reaction in many ways to just how binary we've made this world, that, you're black or you're white. Well, some people are biracial and, or more and more multiracial. So I think, and we're getting to a point where we're able to understand that aspect of people's lives. They don't relate as simply being black or simply being white. And I think that that's a challenge for people too. But getting that message through is part of taking us into that new world. And it's the same for gender in many ways. I think that particularly the people making that statement now, they're saying, let's just ease up on gender. Maybe these, the categories we've put are just too tight to fit into anymore. And they're people who were born female identified, who feel like the beauty standards are too much, all of the stuff that is getting pushed on them doesn't fit. So maybe I'm just, somewhere non-binary. but maybe there are men who are saying, I'm not gay, but I'm not Mr. Butch either. So where do I fit? And maybe that's all going to settle out at some point. But I'm not betting on it. Things, we're on a path of things getting more and more different, and accepting that. And I think that's a path we're going to stay on for a while.
I agree.
Throw in the whole Black Mirror thing of how you identify online in virtual reality, and then it becomes another thing. Then now we're like exponential expansion of that. But we can't settle on how we're going to deal with it as a society if we don't have these conversations, which is why I love having these episodes where we can talk about it and we can be real about it and say, hey, I'm struggling with this, and I don't know, what do you guys think is the best way to deal with this situation? I think that's how we get through it as a society, is by talking about it.
So we have probably a million more questions we could ask, but we are coming towards the
episode
end.
five.
I know.
Oh, it's coming.
Fifth version.
Diversity Inclusion Part 5. But I kind of do want to do a twist. I know I told you both that we'd ask you what your top tip for event planners were, and you can still give that, but I am curious to kind of hear what your favorite or what's a really cool thing you've seen recently at an event that foster diversity and inclusion.
That's a good question.
You know what? I'll let you think about it for a minute, because I got one that happened. We were talking about how, having those networking receptions need to be kind of different for different people. And so I just got back from the Bahamas, where I'm working with a fraternity that has a meeting every 2 years. And so they've got the entire age range from college on up to, boomer plus maybe. And so usually they have a big after party after their big gala, and everybody squeezes into one room. But they thought, hip hop, they've got a fantastic hip hop DJ, but that's not for everybody. And so they've got that in one room, and then in another room, they've got a jazz group that is going to play for that group. And so they're willing to divide up the generations and let them find a place that feels right for them. There's no assignment or anything. People can float between the two, but they didn't feel comfortable putting everybody into just a hip hop situation.
I honestly don't have one, Alex.
Outside
of,
like to see?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
What would you like to see?
It's not too far from what Hilary just said. I'm in all of these events, like, there's not diverse music. I think it can start with really small things that we could do to show that we're inclusive.
Yeah.
And things like having different bands. I actually myself threw an event here, and it still is talked about as the most diverse event Tulsa's ever had, because we did have a hip hop DJ in one room. We had a jazz trio in another room. Then we had rock somewhere, and we had the most diverse people that I've ever seen at an event. So I would like to see more of that. Mm-hmm. But outside of the pronouns, like, I really have not seen a lot of these, a lot of events that I've been involved in, and I've been involved in almost 100 over the last few years, last few years over 100, and I really haven't seen it.
Yeah.
At the risk of playing devil's advocate with a minute and a half to go in the show, is there a danger in going down that road of separating us again, though? If you have a room for hip hop and you have a room for jazz and you have a room, for that, are you then splitting us up again? And the birds of a feather flock together, and so I'll see you in the jazz room.
No, because what happened is the hip hop kids, it was so funny. The hip hop people went to the jazz, and there was older white people in the jazz room and taught them how to dance, and came down and hung out with the hip hop people, and it was the coolest thing ever. So I think people they will show up. You have to give them a chance to show you who they are, and we can have a good time together. I think we just somewhere in our heads think that people won't be accepting of different things. So people are, I like to assume positive intent all the time.
Awesome. Well, any resources that you'd like to share, favorite places to go for ideas, anything like that?
If you're looking, people always ask me about diversity numbers and stats. I think the McKinsey report, McKinsey and Company, is a great place to go and find a lot of diverse stats. And otherwise, I have a book out called That's BS that definitely is all about unconscious bias and our role in that. So those are my two resources.
Awesome.
I guess I will shamelessly plug the MPI diversity and inclusion page. It has links there to a whole bunch of host of other things that you can check out to continue your education.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for joining us today. I am going to let Brandt close out today's episode. But I wanted to personally thank you both for being on. This was a great episode. I love having these conversations, and we hope to have you both back soon.
Thank you.
It was a really great time. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Is there anything else left you want to plug? Anything people follow you on Twitter or anything like that you want to throw out there?
Definitely. Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Risha Grant. Pretty easy to find out there.
Nice. Hilary, how about you?
Yeah, you'll find me at Hilary House all over the internet. So that's easy enough. But I'll be speaking next week at the Mid-Atlantic Education Conference there for MPI MACE, along with Alex. So we'll both be speaking there. And I guess he'll be speaking, but I'll simply be demonstrating how to communicate without words. So. That will not be a mime. Okay.
Sounds good. And Alex, it's a pleasure, man, as always. It's been a while, I feel like, since you and I have hosted together.
Yeah, I know.
And anything new going on in your world you want to report?
So next week I will be at the MPI Potomac Mid-Atlantic Conference and Expo. But before that, I will actually be at Connect Diversity and Connect Financial down in Kissimmee, Florida, where I will be speaking on a new topic. If you want to hear more about diversity and inclusion, you'll be there. I'll be presenting my new topic on diversity and inclusion using social media, which I think is something that a lot of people are also afraid to tackle a bit. So I'll be doing that, and I'll be all over the place. I'm always all over the place. You'll hear more as I get closer to some other events coming up. But yeah, that's it.
Nice. Very good. Very good. Fantastic. And I'm Brandt Krueger. I'm at Brandt Krueger on Twitter and just about everywhere else. So you can follow me and all that kind of stuff. So again, thank you all so much for joining us. We want to remind you that Event Icons is recorded live every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern. You can find out all about the show at www.event-icons.com. There you're going to see all the show notes, all the links to all of the resources we shared. The links to Risha's book will be available. Make sure that gets down in there. And not only there, but that's where you're going to find the links so you can subscribe to all your favorite in your favorite podcast apps. So you can get there, so you can get it automatically delivered onto your phone on a weekly basis as we go along. But we do really enjoy it when you watch it live, because then you can join us. There were people following along, giving us hearts and likes today, but not a lot of questions coming in. So I think they were just enjoying sitting back and listening to our fantastic icons on the show today. So be sure and join us live there or on Facebook or LinkedIn live, and so that you can send your questions to the icons of the event industry every week. Again, 5 p.m. Eastern at event-icons.com. We want to know what you think. Let us know what you want to see out of this episode. Let me know what I should say instead of ladies and gentlemen in my Voice of God announcements. Maybe I shouldn't even call it a Voice of God announcement in out of respect for those non-religious amongst us. Old habits die hard, though, right? That's part of the problem we're always facing. So let me know what you think we should say instead. Let us know what do you think should be included in Diversity and Inclusion episode number 5, because I'm sure we're probably going to hit it. And let us know all of the things, all of your ideas for our topics there. Hashtag Event Icons. And hopefully we'll see you next time on Event Icons.
Thank you for joining us for another amazing episode of Hashtag Event Icons.
To catch all the bonus content, resources mentioned, and an invite to our Facebook and LinkedIn groups,
Head to www.event-icons.com. Also, let us know what you thought about this week's episode. Share your biggest takeaway. Just tag your post with hashtag Event Icons. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you again for joining us. We'll see you next Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern, right here on Hashtag Event Icons.